Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would do this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be the subject over one of the best fighters still in the world of boxing, in my opinion, to this day, overall, and still one of the top fighters at the 135-pound division. And of course, this video is going to be over Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko. And of course, Vasyl Lomachenko, within his last two fights, I thought that he was very decently impressive over two former fighters that were decent contenders, not necessarily A-grade fighters, but fighters all in all that, in my opinion, they were pretty much two good comeback fights. Lomachenko was able to look A-grade in both of those fights. But the big question is about Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko now is where will he go from here and how will he be able to return? Because, of course, Vasyl Lomachenko was the former somewhat undisputed 135-pound champion. And Lomachenko has pretty much been out of his natural weight class now for about a good 2 to 3 years. Because in my opinion, Lomachenko was never really naturally a 135-pounder. You may even have a debate that he's really not even a natural 130-pounder. But anyways, at the end of the day, it is going to be very interesting to see where Lomachenko goes from here. And apparently from what I hear, his comeback fight is going to be somewhere in October or later on this year. And it is very possible that there is a fight in store against him, against an undefeated fighter, I believe, by the name of Jermaine Ortiz, however you pronounce his name. And I have not really watched much of Jermaine Ortiz, but from what I heard in his last fight, he did end up outboxing overall in a very decent fashion the former champion, I believe, of the 130-pound division, Mr. Jamal Herring, who, of course, recently got his ass whooped against Mr. Shakur Stevenson. But all in all, it still is a very decent win, at least for a fighter that is up and coming. So this could be a very particularly interesting fight. But the big question is, if Lomachenko does win that fight, where does he go on from there? And what is the future of Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko? I'm going to talk about it. We're going to see what Mr. DontesBoxingNation has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So ESPN is reporting that Vasyl Lomachenko, who just returned, he just arrived in LA, has already found an opponent. And according to the reports, both fighters have already agreed to a deal to fight against each other in late October. And the opponent is undefeated Jermaine Ortiz. Now, once again, this is not official. This is what ESPN is reporting. Now, I don't know too much, or I didn't know too much about Jermaine Ortiz. Matter of fact, right before I made this video, I went ahead and I watched some highlights of his fights. For those of you guys who don't know, which a lot of people don't know, after Jamal Herring lost to Shakur Stevenson, he ended up taking another loss, and that loss was to Jermaine Ortiz. Jermaine Ortiz is a decent fighter. He's a switch hitter. He's naturally a right-hander, but he fought really well pretty much the whole night as a southpaw against Jamal Herring. Ortiz, he can box and he can fight on the inside. So it should be a really, really good test for Lomachenko with this being his first fight back. The winner of this...
I would agree. It is also going to be very interesting to see where Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko, where he goes on from here. Because Lomachenko's career within the next few years, in my opinion, is pretty much either going to be make it or break it for him. Now, in my opinion, Lomachenko, he already has reached very high heights in his career. But it's really going to depend within these next few years whether he's going to be remembered as just a great fighter or an all-time great fighter. Because if he can actually defeat the likes of Shakur Stevenson, Gervonta Tank Davis, Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, Teofimo Lopez in a rematch, if he can defeat any one of those guys, Lomachenko is going to be remembered as one of the greater fighters within boxing history, because he's already remembered and should be remembered, in my opinion, as one of the more all-around skilled fighters and talented fighters in history. But there's a difference between an all-time great talent and an all-time great fighter. Because to be an all-time great fighter, you not only have to be an all-time great talent, you have to win the majority of your big fights, which Lomachenko has. But it's going to be very interesting. We'll see how he comes back.
Fight is supposed to be fighting against the pound-for-pound lightweight king, undisputed champion Devin Haney, according to ESPN's reports. And Lomachenko did say...
I had a person all in all that actually asked me earlier in the video, I believe this morning, before I'm going to release it, and he asked me, well, now that Lomachenko is back, who do you believe is going to win that fight between Devin Haney and Lomachenko? And I think that, to be honest with you, that's a very interesting fight. But if Lomachenko does not pressure Devin Haney the whole entire time, in my opinion, more than likely Devin Haney would win the fight. I believe that Lomachenko all around is probably more skilled than that of a Devin Haney. But Lomachenko is not going to have the reach of a Devin Haney. Devin Haney has like a 71-inch reach. Lomachenko has a 65.5-inch reach. So if he wants to win that fight, he cannot be afraid of the power of Devin Haney. He cannot be afraid to get hit here and there. He cannot fight like what he did in the Teofimo Lopez fight. He is going to have to put gas overall to the metal when it comes down to what, overall. And he is overall going to have to make that fight very uncomfortable for Devin Haney. And Devin Haney, he does have some holes in his defense to where Lomachenko could take advantage of it. But right now, if you're asking me who would I favor slightly, probably Devin Haney. I think that it's a 50-50 fight, but Devin Haney with his size and with him being bigger, and with him also being a little bit more on the roll, I would probably favor Mr. Devin Haney. But not ruling out an upset by Lomachenko. It's just that I need to see him fight better than what he did in the Teofimo Lopez fight, because he fought completely scared, in my opinion, against Teofimo Lopez. I think that he was way too afraid of the power, and maybe later on he thought that Teofimo was going to tire out, but you can't always rely on that. And Devin Haney does not tire out, but what he will allow you to do is get some hits on him on the inside, because sometimes his defense is a little bit overall, how do I say this, basically, there's some holes in his defense here and there. So right now I would favor Devin Haney by a smidge, but it would be really close.
When he arrived at the airport, he said on camera that he wants to fight for undisputed, meaning he wants to fight Devin Haney, because we know Kambosos has no chance at all. But I'm really looking forward to seeing Lomachenko's return, because if you guys have really been paying attention to Lomachenko's career, the one thing you will notice, Loma has looked like a different fighter at 135 compared to when he was at 126 and 130. You can tell that the size has really, really made a difference. Because
I would agree, and that's overall the perfect way to put it, the size. Because when Lomachenko was starting to have difficulty at 135, Aki TV and Dante, they were always getting on the shit, and they were saying, oh, he's facing better competition. It wasn't really the level of competition, it was the size. And you expect that from someone who is a natural 126 to 130 pounder. It just is what it is. When fighters start moving up the weight classes, the majority of them, when it comes down to it, have a very, very difficult time. And Lomachenko is not someone like a Floyd Mayweather Jr. or a Canelo Alvarez, to where he has a decent reach usually for these weight divisions, or overall he's super thick like a Gervonta Tank Davis or a Canelo Alvarez. He's just not built like that. So Lomachenko, sometimes he's going to have to work a little bit harder in these fights if he wants to win them. So we'll see what happens.
even to this day, it's crazy thinking that Lomachenko was actually down on one of the scorecards when he was fighting against Linares. When you think of who Lomachenko is and all of the losses that Linares has suffered, it's hard to believe that Lomachenko actually struggled against Linares. And that was one of...
Well, no, it's not really hard to believe at all for those of us that are intelligent enough to know what actually happened. Because Dante always tries to compare performances depending on whatever fighter that he likes. And that's why I like to review so many of these videos. So many people, certain people, they may say, well, why do you review their videos? Because you're never going to change these guys' mind. It's not about changing their mind. There's no changing Dante's or Boxing Eagles or Aki TV's mind. You can't change an idiot's mind, especially when they're far that down the rabbit hole. You just can't do it. I'm not here to change their minds. What I'm here to do is warn other people overall about their bullshit. It just is what it is. Because if you listen to Dante talk about other fighters when it comes down, especially Canelo, for example, he'll say, oh, well, yeah, Canelo beat Danny Jacobs, but he already had a loss. But then Devin Haney and Vasyl Lomachenko beat Jorge Linares when he had not been defeated in several years. And he was looked at as the overall number one guy, either him or Mikey Garcia at 135. That's the fighter that Lomachenko beat. So no, it's not that hard to believe that he had a little bit of problems against Mr. Jorge Linares. When Devin Haney beat Jorge Linares was done. With the capital D, he was D-O-N-E. He was done. He was done. Because Jorge Linares not only was knocked out by Lomachenko, and he was never the same after that, then he was also knocked out, I believe, in the first or second round by a no-name fighter after that. So let's not sit here and compare those fights like they're similar, because Jorge Linares was not the same fighter at all, and you know that.
His most difficult fights, because at the time they stopped the fight in the 10th round, the fight was completely even. One judge had Linares up 1 point, another judge had Lomachenko up 1 point, and then the third judge had the fight even. Not to mention, I
think the fight was particularly close. The commentary, in my opinion, was in some of the favor of Lomachenko, but Lomachenko was winning that fight, in my opinion, at the end by a couple of rounds. Linares gave it a very valiant effort. He was a very good to great fighter at the time, but after that fight, he was never the same.
Down Vasyl Lomachenko By way of contrast, Devin Haney won almost every single round against Linares, except for the round, obviously, he got staggered in. My point is that fight.
Well, here's the point, Dante. Once again, we have to compare what type of fighter Linares was when he fought Lomachenko versus Devin Haney. And you know just as well as I do, although you're not going to admit it, that he was not the same fighter when he fought Devin Haney. But you're so full of shit that you're not going to admit it, but it is what it is.
It should have been just as easy for Lomachenko as it was for Devin Haney. Then Lomachenko, he struggled against Luke Campbell. Then he lost to Teofimo Lopez. Those are all fighters that Devin Haney would have beat easy. So with that being said,
right, but once again, we have to compare it a little bit differently, Dante, because Lomachenko is not a natural 135 pounder. But it is what it is. And on top of that, he fought some of those fighters that, all in all, when it came down to it, at a little bit of a different time. Because had the Jorge Linares that overall had not been defeated for several years, had that version of Jorge Linares fought Devin Haney, who the hell knows? It could have went potentially either way. Not saying that I would have favored that Jorge Linares over Devin Haney, but it could have been more interesting because when Jorge Linares fought Devin Haney, he was done.
That's what makes this fight against Jermaine Ortiz so competitive. I believe it will be a competitive fight because, once again, almost everyone Lomachenko has fought at 135, they gave him a fight, from Pedraza to Richard Comey.
Well, they gave him a little bit of competition because of the size, but I would not say all in all that the fights usually were particularly close. But we'll see all in all what ends up happening. But Lomachenko, in my view, if he is going to beat Devin Haney in this next fight against Jermaine Ortiz, he's going to have to look very, very dominant, just like he did against Richard Comey or against, what the hell was his name? Nagatani or whatever that one Japanese fighter's name was.
All of those guys gave Lomachenko, surprisingly, a really good fight. So I see Ortiz being in this fight. I still see Lomachenko winning this fight, but I see it as a very good test for Lomachenko. Let's see if this fight gets announced. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for this video. But we will see what happens with Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko, which should be very, very interesting. And overall, I am going to be very interested to see how he looks because, once again, these next few years in his career, because in my opinion, Lomachenko only has a few years left, it's going to be very interesting to see what ends up happening in his career. And if he is somehow able to beat Devin Haney and regain the belts, he is going to have all the power within his position. It's going to be very interesting. But that is, of course, if and when that happens, that is a big if. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see what happens with Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko.